Hello and welcome again to RC Model Reviews, and I got a good response from the video I did on the old radio gear I had, the single channel OS Pixie gear. So I thought I'd give you all a bit more RC history so you can see what it was like in the olden days when we used to fly with some gear that really wasn't quite as good as the stuff you see today. And here are a couple of radio modeler magazines from the 1970s. We've got April 1970 here and December 70 here. And this is pretty indicative. Now these are English magazines, not US magazines. I don't have any US ones from the era because way back then, the Antipodes, that's Australia and New Zealand, we used to get a lot of English stuff, not much American stuff. So this is going to have prices in pounds and things, but I'll try and do a conversion. But a good starting place is the fact that this magazine cost 50 cents back in April 1970. That's a long time ago. It was 3 and 6. See, 3 and 6 was the cover price in the UK. So we're going back an awfully long time. It's been an awfully long time since any magazine could be bought for 50 cents or 3 and 6 on the newsstand. So let's have a look inside some of these magazines. Let's have a look inside some of these magazines and just see what you got for your money back then. Okay, the first thing you probably noticed with all these magazines is back in these days, people didn't always buy their radio gear. A lot of them built their radio gear. There was a huge number of kit set radio transmitters and receivers available. And in fact, you could save an enormous amount of money by buying this kit set stuff. And so the magazines were filled with them. And if you didn't want to buy it, build it, you could always buy it. There were a lot of stuff like this. This was mainstream, Simprop. I actually had one of their single channel systems way back in, I don't know, must have been the late 60s or very early 70s. And it really wasn't very good. In fact, that company went bankrupt, went broke a few years later. And here's one of those companies that sold the kits. Now you notice this is a Quantum 6 by Rencon, and the entire cost of the transmitter and receiver, including DX. Now DX is a brand name for nickel cadmium batteries. They were round disc cells, very popular back then, but the total cost to build it with 4 standard servos was £118. That was a huge amount of money, and you had to build it yourself. And if you didn't want to build it and you wanted to buy one, well, you could get the Skyleader Clubman, which was a pretty good all-round sport radio. With 4 servos, that was going to cost you £139, which again was a massive amount of money. And of course, they had these fabulous new servos, absolutely brilliant. This is a FB3 servo, and the specifications were that it was 1.75 ounces, which isn't too bad. That's around about, what's it, about 50 grams or something, 45 grams. Thrust up to 5 pounds, which doesn't really tell you much, does it? But I can tell you they had very little thrust. But here's the really good thing. Maximum transit time of 0.8 seconds. Now, nobody would use a servo that slow these days. But we thought they were great way back then. And of course, a lot of the old gear was completely interesting styling. Look at this. This is the flight link control. They have some really oddball styling for their transmitter. It's a strange one, but there was a lot of difference between the radios back then. They didn't all look the same like they have done recently. Engine tests were a big thing because there was no electric back then. It was all glow motors or nitro motors and diesel motors, and not even many gas motors, to be honest. And here's a Ross twin. Peter Chin, he was a very, very famous and very popular engine reviewer. He died recently, I think just a year or two ago, but he did some really brilliant engine reviews. And here we've got a 60 size twin, and all it produces is 0.75 horsepower. They're really wimpy by comparison with today's Schnurl ported powerhouses. I mean, but he used to give a really good breakdown. In fact, if you turn the page, you might even find the bits. Yeah, see, sort of a photograph of the engine, stripped them right down, did a whole lot of stuff. Really good quality reviews. And of course, no magazine would be complete without the plans. They used to give you free plans quite often, or they'd promote plans you could buy through the magazine. And here's a 049, the little Cox Baby 049 powered Delta. It looks like single channel. There's an escapement in here, like I showed you, the escapement that the OS model used. You know, this is way back. These are single channel models, and look how futuristic that is. Absolutely marvelous. And here's a bit of a look into the English Salabo balsa factory. Look at the size of it. They had huge amounts of space now. You probably can't even buy balsa wood in most places these days because the foam electrical revolution's taken over, and a lot of people just don't build models anymore. They just buy the ARFs or the plug and play, and away they go. But this was way back. They had a whole factory dedicated to the making of balsa wood. I think it's just a one-page article. And here's more single channel stuff. This is a single channel model with an escapement in it. And again, plans there. Now, these plans, you'd have to scale them up by hand if you wanted to use it. It didn't come actually, what does it say, full-size plans? Yeah, I think you have to buy them. And here we go. This is what we had to do, build them all out of balsa wood and cover them with silk or nylon. It was, even plastic film wasn't that common then. You can see the escapement up there and the radio gear. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was an awful lot of work as well. And this is another regular feature with, this is a single channel model being launched, because you very rarely got them to take off from the ground. There was just not enough directional control with the single channel. And more information plus schematic diagrams for the Remcom 70. That was the system I showed you before, the price, 100 and something pounds, and they give you the circuit diagram. And look at the servos. I mean, they have this arm, but you can get a linear throw because they hook the arm into a plastic rack there. That was quite popular, quite common to have linear outputs on servos back in those days. And we're looking at just more stuff for saurers, and yeah, good stuff. Now, this is an interesting article. Way back about the 70s, radio control gear used to be on fixed frequencies, you know, your 27 megahertz mainly. And they decided that they could fit more channels in the available space by reducing the spacing between those frequencies. Originally it was 50 kilohertz spacing, although back then it was kilocycles. We didn't have hertz, we only had cycles. And so the various manufacturers got together and agreed, so they came up with what they called split frequencies. And they were only 25 kilocycles apart. Here's an article that describes that and gives people information. There was a lot of information in these magazines, which is quite good. You know, it's an interesting article in its day. Now, of course, we've got spread spectrum. This is all irrelevant. And if you're into cars or boats, here's a review of some of the state-of-the-art gear from back then. Look at this, the RCS Digi2 two-channel system with a knob. It's got a knob and a little lever for your throttle. And that's the way they made them back then. Inside views, all that sort of stuff. Brilliant, isn't it? And here's another review. It's a three-channel system. It's got two single-axis sticks and a throttle stick or whatever in the middle there. And people ask, how did mode 1 ever come about? You know, mode 1's where you have the ailerons on the right, or you turn on the right, and your throttle on the right and your elevator rudder on the left. Well, this is why. Because way back here in the 70s and the late 60s, it was cheaper to make radio gear with two separate sticks. And they only moved, this one only moved left and right, so up and down. This one only moved left and right. So, but you were forced to fly mode 1 because it was cheaper. And then eventually, of course, when the dual axis sticks became more affordable, people just kept flying that way. So that's why I fly mode 1, because I started with old gear, something a little bit like this. And here's a review of the whole system. And this servo has an incredible, I'd calculated it out, 24 ounce-inches of torque. And it's a full-size servo, 24 ounce-inches of torque. That, no one would fly a model with that, a full-size servo with that amount of torque these days. It's just wimpy as. And yet another one of these, you must fly mode 1 transmitters with the dual-axis sticks, because they were just cheap. You could save yourself a fortune by buying a 3-channel radio or a 2-channel radio instead of a 4-channel radio. And so that's what a lot of us had to do. And this is a build-it-yourself one, another one of these build-it-yourself ones, and it's got all the instructions and the pictures and so forth. And over multiple weeks, over multiple months, they would string this out, so you'd have to buy the next version of the next edition of the magazine to finish your radio. And this is state-of-the-art high-powered flight. It's a plane with a tuned pipe on it. Look at this, and it's got a cowling around the motor and everything. That's really fast. One thing you'll notice about British era modelling in the 70s, apart from the odd bit of colour on the cover, they flew in black and white. I think the entire British Isles was black and white for several decades. You know, it's just, there was no colour there. It was all black and white. Maybe it's just that the magazines were really cheap and they couldn't afford colour printing on the inside, but there's no colour inside these magazines. You just get the colour on the cover. That's all you get. So, yeah, I hope that little bit of a browse of these magazines from decades ago has been of interest to you. I've got some other stuff laying around somewhere. I'll drag out some more history of the RC era, and we'll take a look at that later perhaps. But of course, no video of this era could be complete without the hot chicks. Look, they have hot chicks on the cover of these magazines sometimes, but occasionally all you can see is the hand, but sometimes you get the whole hot chick. Look at that, eh? Who said there was no sexism back in the 1970s? Well, thanks for watching. Comments on the bottom. Any questions on the bottom? Thumbs up if you liked it. More to come on RC Model Reviews.